Hey there, I'm Brooke Miller, registered dietitian, certified lactation counselor, and a mama who's helped hundreds of moms feel like themselves again after baby, boost their energy, mood, metabolism, and even their milk supply. Inside of the Postpartum Reset podcast, you'll learn how to take care of your health so that you can show up best for the ones you care about most. Each week, we'll tackle topics like nutrition, exercise, breastfeeding, mental health, and so much more. Plus, you'll get exclusive access to guest experts who will share different ways to make your pregnancy and postpartum experience so much easier. Whether you're approaching the postpartum period or you're right in the thick of it, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about pregnancy after loss and recurrent miscarriages. And you might be listening to this and maybe you've never experienced loss, or maybe you've never experienced pregnancy after loss, but you probably will have friends or family experience loss, or, in your future, it may be something that you are unexpectedly faced with. And so I just wanted to share this because this is my journey and this is my last pregnancy. And I want to share a little bit more about all of the emotions and feelings and things that have come up throughout this pregnancy and some of the previous pregnancies. So I'll give a little backstory. So my first pregnancy was with Ashton, and that was in 2018, 2019. And it was not a normal pregnancy. It was not a typical pregnancy. We found out around 12 weeks that, he had a thick nuchal translucency. There was fluid on his chest, and they told us that he probably had some sort of genetic abnormality. And that was kind of it at that point. And we just had to go see maternal fetal medicine for more testing. And the outlook wasn't good. They told us that the odds that he would survive were pretty low, and they just kind of encouraged us to terminate and try again for a new one. And it was a very surreal experience to see your baby, a healthy baby, on the screen at 12 weeks and seeing them kick around and then being told that with no clear information. And so the next few weeks, we kind of went alongside it. We did a blood test and ruled out some of the other things just because we wanted to have an idea of what, he maybe had. And we found out that he had about a 65% chance of having Down syndrome. And so we were debating on whether we wanted to do further testing, and we kind of held off for a little while. And at 20 weeks, we found out he needed open heart surgery and had a heart defect. And so the heart defect he has is definitely more specific to Down syndrome. And so I probably honestly didn't need any more testing at that point because it was pretty clear at that point that he did have Down syndrome, but doctors really pushed for an amnio, which I personally wouldn't do again just now that I've had 5 miscarriages, because there is a risk of miscarriage. But again, this was my first pregnancy. I didn't know. And we got the amnio results and found out around 20 weeks that he did have Down syndrome. And so at that point, we, got the right doctors. We got the right medical team in place. We, had our NICU stay planned, and we felt really prepared. By the time that he was born, we felt so prepared. We were so excited. We felt like we had a great doctors and medical team and cardiologists. And I mean, honestly, the cardiologists were probably the best doctors that we had throughout our pregnancy, because personally, the maternal fetal doctors that we had they were not great. Not great with bedside manner, not great in general. And the cardiologists were just so positive, and they were like, yep, we fix this stuff all the time. And so he was born early at 36 weeks, and he was 4 pounds, 14 ounces. The last, trimester, my placenta wasn't working properly, which is pretty common with Down syndrome. And so that really heightens the risk of stillbirth. And so I was having to go in for 2 ultrasounds a week, plus 1 appointment a week at my OB. So it was a lot of monitoring. It was, steroid shots at 29 weeks, because that's when we had initially prepared to deliver him. And so it was just a really surreal pregnancy and experience. And it was not typical. It was very, very stressful. There was a lot of anxiety going on. And then when we decided that we were ready to try again for baby number 2, we got pregnant. I don't know, a few months after trying, I believe. and we had an early miscarriage. And my thoughts during that time were, okay, well, miscarriage is pretty common. The odds that I'll miscarry again are so low. We'll try again. We'll get pregnant. We won't have any problems. And we got pregnant again shortly after. And we went in around 6 weeks and they didn't really see a heartbeat yet. And they said, okay, this can happen. I ovulate late, maybe it's nothing bad, but let's come back in a week. But the doctor she was not very optimistic, but she's like, let's come back in a week and just double check. So we went back around 7 weeks and there was still no heartbeat. And there was, I believe, no fetal pole or yolk sac. I mean, there wasn't a lot of development, and I knew when I ovulated. And so we, had a choice to make and I think this is something, unless you've gone through miscarriage, you don't necessarily know, but you have options with miscarriage. It's, trying to miscarry naturally on your own, taking a pill or having a DNC. And so because this was my second miscarriage, but my first, having to make this decision of how to pass, I decided to wait. And I said, yeah, I want to try to do this naturally. I don't really want to go through anything medically if I don't need to. And so I waited. And around 10 weeks, I started bleeding really heavily. And I assumed because I had been bleeding pretty heavily for 5 days that I had miscarried, a majority. And I went in for a vaginal ultrasound and they said, yeah, like basically the entire pregnancy is still in you. You still have this massive sac. And it was an empty sac pregnancy, which meant that the baby stopped developing very early on and like your body absorbs this baby, but the sac and your hormones, believe that you're still pregnant. And so it's still growing. And after that vaginal ultrasound, I went home and I started bleeding just insanely heavy. I was going through like a pad every 3 to 5 minutes. And if you go through 2 pads in an hour, I believe you have to go to the ER. And so I called them and said, what do you want me to do? Like at this point? And they said, you need to come to the ER right now. Like you're losing way too much blood and we need to do an emergency DNC. And so my husband drove me to the hospital. It's about a 10-minute drive. So thank goodness, not very long. And by the time I got to the hospital, like it looked like a murder scene. And they were like, here, try to give us a urine sample. And I was like, how do you expect me to do this urine sample? And right after that, I went in to my ER room and, I was bleeding so much that they were changing pads in my bedding every 5 minutes. And finally the nurse was like, we just need to bring like a commode in here and you just need to like sit on this. And it was so intense. It was so painful. I had been through labor before and it was identical to labor. And I just remember crying to my husband being like, this is so unfair that we have to go through this and we don't get a baby out of this. And it was like waiting for the anesthesiologist and waiting for the team. And my doctor was very upset because people were not moving quick enough. And so anyway, they just wheeled me back from my room to the OR. And it was probably a 45-second, walk there. And by the time that I got there, the doctor like lifted up my gown and looked and he's like, when was her stuff changed last? And the nurse is like, I just changed it like less than a minute ago. And he literally looked at me with fear in his eyes and puts the mask on. And it was just a terrifying experience. And I woke up just shaking. I felt like my body, I had lost so much blood. I felt like my body had been hit by a truck for literally about 2 days afterwards. And it was so intense. And I felt like first off, nobody had ever shared their miscarriage experience with me. I just assumed it was like a period. And I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea that it would be 3 weeks of waiting to bleed and then basically an entire week. I did not know it would be a month-long process. And the emotions of just waiting to miscarry and waiting for your body to do this and then feeling like you failed because your body couldn't do this naturally. It was just a ton of emotions, and it was obviously a very physically traumatic experience. And then we decided to try again, and then another miscarriage. And this one was an early one, so it wasn't the same physical trauma. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just felt at this point that my body was broken, because at this point I had had 3 miscarriages and 1 high-risk pregnancy. And I was starting to get angry and jealous and resentful of everybody out there, all my friends who were getting pregnant on accident, truthfully, and people out there who were just like, oh, we tried once and got pregnant. And I truthfully wanted to just smack everybody in my life and strangers. I mean, I just became like an angry person and just so triggered and just so jealous that I couldn't have this. If you've been wanting to reach your healthiest weight and feel like yourself again postpartum without having to sacrifice your favorite foods or your milk supply, I've got a free workshop just for you. Inside of this free workshop, you'll discover how to boost energy, mood, metabolism, and even protect your milk supply. You'll learn common mistakes that moms make that actually cause exhaustion, mood swings, low milk supply, and weight loss resistance to become worse, things that moms don't even realize. And you'll learn the proven 3-step method to heal your hormones and metabolism after baby so you can go from surviving to thriving postpartum. Plus, as a free gift, you'll get my postpartum snack guide when you come hang out with us. All you have to do is click the link in the show notes to save your seat today. Spots are limited. See you there. And then I was like, all right, well, we've had 3. What are the odds? What are the odds this keeps happening? And then we get pregnant again, 4th miscarriage, back to back in a row. And we figured out that the reason for some of the miscarriages was that my progesterone was so low. And so I needed to not only get on progesterone when I got a positive test, but I actually needed to get on progesterone 72 hours after a positive ovulation test because my levels were that low that I basically needed to immediately get on progesterone after ovulation. And so I had been doing that. I think I started that right before my 4th miscarriage. And then my 4th miscarriage happened, which was an early one. And then 2 weeks later, I conceived Sawyer. And being pregnant with him, it was so exciting, but it was so surreal. You know, you get this positive test, and after going through 4 back-to-back losses and then, you know, this high-risk pregnancy, it was a lot of fear and anxiety. And is this going to keep happening? Like, are we going to see a heartbeat this time? Or are we going to have another high-risk pregnancy? Or like, how is this going to end? How can this possibly end good? And I just remember like having a full-blown panic attack on our way to our 6-week ultrasound. And my husband meets me there and he's like, are you okay? I was like, no, I'm not. I'm terrified. I'm terrified to walk into that same room where we've gotten bad news, the same doctors, like the same team, the same hospital where I had my miscarriage surgery in the ER, and just so many memories, you know, flooded. And at Sawyer's 6-week, you know, everything looked good. And then we went into the 8-week and everything looked good, and the 12-week, and every ultrasound was like a sense of relief, but it was also waiting for that shoe to drop. That's how I felt that entire pregnancy was. I felt like I couldn't truly have joy and excitement because, you know, we were just like waiting for something bad to happen. And so finally by the 3rd trimester, I did feel pretty confident that we would have a full-term baby, you know, a healthy baby. And we did. And it was just so beautiful to have that rainbow baby experience. And then we talked about having a 3rd and completing our family. And then we found out we were pregnant in August of last year. And then we went in for our ultrasound. And in September, we found out that our baby did not have a heartbeat. And so it was the same situation, different type of miscarriage, but same situation where they said, you know, come back in a week. But this time they were way more optimistic than they were that other ultrasound. And we walk in at 7 weeks, you know, a week later, and I actually wasn't that nervous at this point. And I went alone, actually. I went with just my son because my husband had to take our other son to school. And again, I wasn't nervous. I was pretty confident that we'd see a heartbeat. And so I was in the room alone, and she's like, I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat, and the baby is smaller, you know, than the baby was. And so we ended up, you know, I had a choice again to make. Do I wait potentially 3 weeks and end up with another emergency surgery? Do I take a pill, which after almost hemorrhaging and like hemorrhaging in the ER. I was like, yeah, I'm not going to take that. Don't need to hemorrhage again at home. And so we ended up scheduling a D&C about a week later. So I wanted to give my body a few days to, process and see what happens. And I did start bleeding for about 3 days before my D&C, pretty lightly. And then I went in, had it, we tested the baby. And of course, the testing couldn't even be simple. So we get results like 4 weeks later and it says that it's a normal girl. But then it's like, because it's a normal girl, there's potential that there was maternal cell contamination, which meant that that they didn't actually test the baby's DNA, that they tested my DNA. And that's what ended up happening. And so we had to test again just to make sure. And we got results, weeks and weeks later. And we found out that it was a boy and he had trisomy 16, which is the most common reason for miscarriage. And so, it's random. It's very common. There was nothing obviously we could do to prevent it. And yeah, I feel like that finally gave us some closure because that was the only one where we actually had an answer. I mean, we did know my progesterone played a role in several of them, but that was one that it gave us that answer and that closure. And then on Thanksgiving Day this year, we found out we were pregnant, and it was, a lot of nerves, a lot of anxiety, a lot of like, is this going to pan out? And a lot of conversations about, all right, if we miscarry again, are we done? We can't keep doing this. We can't keep going through loss after loss. And like, we have to hit at this point where we're done. And so, we hit this point of, okay, let's see what happens. And, so far all of our ultrasounds have been great. We went in for an 8-week and saw a heartbeat, went in for our 12-week, saw a heartbeat. And I went in, this week for a 16-week visit. And of course they couldn't find the heartbeat on the Doppler because I have an anterior placenta this time. And so then I had to get a quick ultrasound yesterday, and it was very quick, and they immediately saw a baby moving around and, got the heartbeat and said, everything's normal. It's really tricky to get this, with an anterior placenta. And so we are finally at the point where I'm starting to feel less and less anxiety and less nerves and more confident. But then of course we have our 20-week ultrasound, and that is the one where we found out Ashton needed open heart surgery. And then, in the 3rd trimester is when we found out he wasn't growing and we had placenta problems. And so I feel like every step we make it feels really great and it feels accomplished, and it does take some anxiety off, but then, you're kind of waiting to make it to that next step and to make it past that next point. And so there's just a lot of emotions with anxiety after loss and pregnancy after loss. And it's hard to fully enjoy every single moment and celebrate every single moment because there's just so much fear involved with it. And so, if this is you, if you're currently pregnant after loss, or if you are trying to get pregnant after loss, if you're going through loss, just know that like all of the emotions that you're feeling are valid and you're not alone. I joined a recurrent pregnancy loss group after this one. And I started with a therapist who had been, who had gone through miscarriages, and just talking through all of this has really been helpful, in the journey. And I think it's so tempting. It's just so tempting for us to just hold all of these, bad feelings in and, pretend like it never happened and not talk about it. But the truth is, it's been really healing for me to talk about my story and to share it with other moms and to talk to other moms about their experience so that they know that they're not alone and that there is hope, for a brighter future, even after going through something, so horrible, especially going through something so horrible so many times. And so if you have a friend who is going through miscarriage or recurrent losses, or have lost a child, or you have, a friend who's pregnant after that, just really give her patience and really ask what she needs and how she's doing. And, it may feel weird to you how she's responding, but it's just so common to have so many fears and worries, as you go through this. And I'm feeling really excited to like close this chapter of my life. It's been 6 years in the making of like getting pregnant and, losing babies and just going through all of this. And so it feels very good. And it feels like a great way to just kind of close this chapter of our journey. And so I'm excited for it. I'm excited for this baby to come in the summer and, to move past some of this stuff, because it is emotionally draining. And so I hope that if you're listening to this, I hope that you don't have to experience loss in your future. But I want you to know that if you do, you're not alone. And there are people out there who are willing to talk to you. And I found so much comfort in talking to people who had gone through loss. And, just know, like just telling somebody that you're sorry and sending them a coffee, sending them a meal, like just let them know that you're thinking about them. That can go such a long way. And I know that there's a lot of friends and family out there who they were scared to ask me how I was doing, and they were scared to talk about it. And so they just pretended like nothing had ever happened. And that was almost more hurtful than anything else. And so if you have somebody going through this, just acknowledge, hey, I see you. I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you, how you've been doing. You don't have to do this like grand gesture, but let them know that you're thinking about them, and that, if you're a Christian, that you're praying for them or whatever it may be. Just let them know that they're not alone on their journey, and, send them a little love, because this journey is not for the faint of heart. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I know it wasn't a very happy episode. I hope you guys enjoyed just learning a little bit more about our story with pregnancies and loss and high-risk pregnancy. And I hope that, it can help educate some people on kind of what to expect going through this. I hope that some moms who've gone through loss feel seen and not alone and validated with some of your feelings. And I hope that this can, reach the moms who it needs to reach. And thanks so much for being here, guys. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you next week with another new episode. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to the Postpartum Reset podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you could share this episode with a mom friend and leave me a written review. This helps the podcast reach and help even more moms. Come say hi and connect over at Instagram at Nutrition for Mamas.